Paul Lafrance here, Stream of Consciousness series. This video is entitled Addictions Are Just Band-Aids, which just happened to flow beautifully out of the last video, which I hope you'll go back and watch. And to understand what I'm doing, please go back to the very beginning, to the intro video to understand what I'm doing. I am well over an hour in and continuing to go. Okay, I'm going to reset my timer here. Addictions are just band-aids. Okay, this topic definitely has a lot to do with my dad. So when it comes to the topic of addictions, I think we are all aware of the ones that are the most commonly talked about, the most commonly criticized, and those are the most visual addictions. So we can easily talk about alcoholism and drug addiction, but when I'm talking about addictions, I'm talking about all the addictions, whether it's food addiction, whether it's pornography, whether it's addiction to criticism or judgment, addiction to consumerism. We all know our addictions in the mirror. We know what they are. For the purpose of this particular video, I want to point out what I learned about addictions, and that addictions are just band-aids, in the same way that anything we do for our identity, like in the previous video I talked about cars and watches, about how they are band-aids for our identity. Addictions are band-aids for our wounds. So we have to understand what I'm talking about is when we have emotional wounds that we've not dealt with, that we're walking around with, which most people, I believe, are walking around with emotional wounds. And because they don't know how to heal the emotional wounds, we go to a doctor for physical wounds, but there aren't many doctors around for the emotional wounds that actually are effective. And this isn't knocking counseling and psychiatry. I'm giving my opinion as a crazy person. So, well, the addictions are the band-aids we are putting over a gaping wound. So it's like, when you have a cannonball wound, as like Brian Regan, one of my favorite comedians, would talk about, it's like putting a band-aid over a gaping hole in your chest. Now, we all know that that's probably not going to keep you from bleeding out, but you get my point. The problem is that we look at the way that we have handled addictions in the past is like, we need you to get past the drive for whatever it is that you're addicted to without actually healing the wound a lot of the time. This isn't a broad stroke statement, but I think it applies to most people's experience. If we are applying the band-aid to the gaping wound without healing the wound, it's not going to be effective. We just end up living in a cage for the rest of our life. So, my dad. My father was, for understandable reasons, had his addictions because of stuff that happened when he was young. So the drug addiction, the alcohol addiction, and the cigarette addiction, which was by far the lesser of the three, controlled him most of his life. But the problem is, my dad would end up going to rehab with a very stern and heartfelt desire to get better, because that's what his family needed. But the problem lies with the fact that when he would come out of rehab, my dad, who was in there loving the other people, helping other people out of their shit, would come out of rehab, and 99 times out of the first 100 attempts, or 100 draws back to the old ways, the old addictions, he would succeed, which took every fiber of strength in his being. And then the one day would come when he would fail. And what would the closest people around him end up doing? They would end up judging him for it. They would end up, and I was one of them, be like, oh, that's my dad. There he is. Weak man, can't sustain, isn't strong enough to overcome this addiction. And I'll never be more sorry in my entire life for that, until the day came when I finally understood. I understood, and I can only thank God that I was given this level of understanding, because I realized that my dad was still here. And that when I realized through my own life experience as a very sensitive person, if the people closest to me misjudged my heart incorrectly, it would be like the equivalent of taking my knees out from underneath me. Like, it just would destroy me. And that was one of the keys to understanding. I'm going, my dad has had that happen to him by his own family for so many years. And instead of leaving, in order to push the pain down to stay and continue to love his family, he would be smoking and drinking. He wasn't a violent drunk. He wasn't an abusive drunk. He wasn't even a happy drunk. He was a functioning addict. But one Christmas, I ended up saying publicly in front of the entire family what I believed to be the truth. I said, Dad, I understand that for all of these years you have heard your own family tell you that you weren't strong enough. And instead of the one time that you failed, which is 99 times out of 100 on a test, that's usually like, well done, son, way to go. I think my dad would love to have heard, well done, Dad. Forget the one you missed. Let's focus on the 99 you got right. Instead of it being, oh, you make that one mistake and you're fucked. Like it was such a mistake. And I said this to him. I said, Dad, I don't know whether I would be strong enough to handle my own family, the people closest to me, who are supposed to know my heart, who are supposed to see the true me, and to have them look at me and be like, you're just weak, and stay anyway and love with every fiber of my being anyway. So if I was you, I'd be smoking and drinking too. And when I grow up, I want to be just like you. My dad ended up saying to me that that was the first time he'd ever felt truly understood. And here's the interesting fact. And I'm going a little longer on this one because it's my dad. Within a year of that, he had quit drinking for good. Less than a year after that, he quit pot. And just earlier this year, he surprised the hell out of me going, I've now quit smoking. And I understood. I was like, because that was the beginning of suturing a wound that had been there for so many years. And there was no longer a need to pour alcohol or drugs on it as a healing balm because the wound had been healed. And I just wish that I had figured it out sooner. Yeah, longer on that one. All right, moving on to the next one. Whew. The next topic in our series is ADHD, my greatest gift.